Just after 3 in the morning, a long-haul driver saw a barefoot child walking beside a highway with no houses for 50 miles. He stopped. The child did not ask for a ride. He asked the driver to leave the cab, bring a light, and follow him into the trees. The driver almost opened the door. Then his headlights caught the black cord extending from the child's back. It crossed the gravel shoulder and disappeared into something enormous inside the forest. That was only the first road. On another, a trucker stranded in a Christmas blizzard heard footsteps crossing the roof of his trailer. His phone said 5 minutes had passed. Rescue crews said he had been missing for 3 days, and on a highway absent from every map, a sealed trailer began to cry. The voice inside knew the driver's name. Then it used the name of his sister, who had been dead since childhood. 3 drivers. 3 doors they were never meant to open. Tonight we follow them beyond the last working streetlight. Keep your doors locked. Do not stop for anything that knows your name. This is Night Evidence. Story 1. The child beside the highway. For most of my 20s, I drove long-haul routes through parts of the country where darkness feels less like an absence of light and more like a physical thing pressing against the windows. I liked those roads at first. There were no supervisors watching over my shoulder, no crowded offices, and no one asking questions. Just the engine beneath me and a ribbon of asphalt running through the trees. The night that ended my career began near the border between 2 enormous stretches of government land. I will not name the highway. It has no towns for nearly 100 miles, almost no phone service, and a reputation among drivers for sudden fog and unexplained lights in the woods. I entered it shortly after midnight. An older driver had once told me never to stop there after dark. He described motorists who appeared beside disabled cars and vanished when anyone approached, but truckers collect stories the way windshields collect insects. I had heard hundreds of them and believed almost none. That night, the warning returned to me several times. Each time, I dismissed it as fatigue. By 2:30, my coffee was gone and every radio station had dissolved into static. I had been driving for nearly 10 hours. The white lane markers seemed to stretch whenever I blinked, so I lowered the window and let cold air strike my face. That was when something appeared at the edge of my headlights. It was small, upright, and standing on the shoulder. I passed it before my mind could decide what it was. At first, I told myself it had been a sign or a narrow tree stump. Then I checked my passenger mirror. A child stood in the red light behind my trailer. He was so small that he could not have been older than 7. He did not wave or chase the truck. He simply remained beside the forest, watching me disappear. There had been no vehicle on either shoulder, no scattered glass, and no lights behind the trees. The nearest service area was more than 40 miles away. Even if a family had broken down and walked for help, no parent would have allowed a barefoot child to wander alone in that cold. Every instinct developed during years on the road told me to continue driving. A child could be bait for a robbery. I could be exhausted and hallucinating. Stopping a loaded trailer on that narrow shoulder could kill both of us. Then another thought replaced all the others. If he was real and I left him there, he would die. I stopped, switched on the hazards, and slowly reversed until my headlights found him again. He was walking now, barefoot on the gravel, wearing pale pajamas far too thin for the cold. He moved at the same slow pace despite the engine, the lights, and the hiss of my brakes. I kept the doors locked and lowered the passenger window a few inches. "Hey, kid, are you hurt?" He continued walking. "Where are your parents?" The child stopped. His face remained angled toward the road. "Lost," he whispered. The word sounded dry, like leaves moving across pavement. I told him to climb onto the passenger step. We would drive until I found a signal and call the police. Instead of approaching the truck, he turned his head toward the forest. Home is in there. There was no house, driveway, fence, or light among those trees, only trunks packed so closely together that the forest looked like a solid wall. "Then the police can help us find it," I said. "Get inside." The child finally looked at me. My headlights covered his entire body, but his face remained strangely indistinct. I could see pale skin and two dark hollows where his eyes should have reflected light. "You have to come out," he said. "I cannot find the path." His voice was still quiet, but it no longer sounded frightened. I reached for the gear selector. The child stepped closer. "Please, your door has a light. Bring it into the trees." He repeated the request in exactly the same tone. The words were polite, but they sounded rehearsed, as if something had listened to frightened children and learned the correct sentences without understanding how fear should sound. I almost obeyed. That is the part that still frightens me. My hand actually touched the door handle. He looked helpless, and every decent impulse in me insisted that leaving him was wrong. Then I noticed something behind him. At first, it appeared to be his shadow. But shadows do not rise from the lower back, and they do not remain solid when the person casting them moves. A thick black cord emerged from beneath the child's pajama shirt. It crossed the gravel, bent around a stone, and continued between the trees. The farther it went, the wider it became. It was not tied to him. It was part of him. Or he was part of whatever waited at the other end. The child saw where I was looking. "What is attached to you?" I asked. His pleading expression disappeared. "Nothing. I can see it." Every cricket in the forest stopped at once. The child straightened. The hollows around his eyes deepened, and the pale skin across his face tightened like cloth pulled over a frame. "You are tired," he said. "Come out of the truck." The voice no longer belonged to a child. It was deeper and enormous, as if the words had traveled through a tunnel before leaving that small mouth. The black cord flexed. Something shifted between the trees. Not a branch, not an animal. A mass large enough to change the shape of the darkness around it. "Come out," it ordered again. I turned the key. The engine hesitated. The child placed one bare foot on the passenger step. I tried the ignition again. The diesel caught, and I pushed the truck into gear. For a second, the tires spun against loose gravel. The child reached for the door. His fingers were too long now, stretching toward the handle while the thing in the forest pulled itself closer. Then the tires found asphalt. The truck surged forward. In my mirror, the child remained beside the highway. The cord behind him tightened and rose from the ground. For one moment, my trailer lights revealed a suggestion of something immense among the trees, using that little body the way an anglerfish uses a light. It did not chase me. It simply withdrew its bait. As the figure disappeared between the trees, another pale shape briefly moved beside it. It was smaller than the first. I could not tell whether I had seen a second child or the remains of an earlier lure waiting to be used. I drove until sunrise and resigned after completing the delivery. I now work locally and refuse every route that would keep me on the road after dark. Sometimes, I still wonder how many drivers saw that child before me, and how many opened the door before noticing what was attached to him. Story 2. The Christmas load. My father drove a truck for almost 30 years. He survived brake failures, armed thieves, ice storms, and more close calls than he ever admitted to my mother. But after 2007, he refused to drive Interstate 94 near Billings, Montana. He never explained why until many years later. That December, he accepted one final delivery before Christmas. He planned to leave Minneapolis, unload in Billings, and return home by the 23rd. At home, my sisters and I had already placed his presents beneath the tree. My mother pretended not to worry, but every time the telephone rang, she crossed the room before the second ring. My father had never missed Christmas, even during his busiest years. A blizzard reached Montana before he did. Around midnight, less than an hour from his destination, his truck struck black ice. The trailer swung sideways and dragged the cab into the median. 2 feet of packed snow stopped the rig from rolling. My father was unhurt, but the truck was trapped. His phone showed no service, and emergency dispatch told him the road was too dangerous for a recovery vehicle. He had food, blankets, and fuel, so he settled into the sleeper and prepared to wait. Sometime after midnight, the engine stopped. The cold woke him. He turned the key. The engine started with a violent metallic grinding sound. Warning lights covered the dashboard, and steam rose past the windshield. He shut it down before it destroyed itself. Outside, the storm had weakened. Snow absorbed every sound, leaving the landscape unnaturally still. He opened the hood. Oil and coolant covered the engine. Underneath, the oil pan had been split repeatedly, not cracked by the crash, but cut open in several places. The marks looked as though someone had attacked it with an axe. A trail of black oil crossed the snow toward the forest. Footprints followed it. My father ran back to the cab. As he reached the door, a figure moved behind the trailer. It crossed from one side to the other on 2 legs, much too quickly for a person moving through deep snow. He climbed inside, locked both doors, and took the pistol he kept beneath the bunk. The CB radio was dead. The interior lights weakened. His phone began dialing emergency services and disconnected before anyone answered. Then something climbed onto the rear of the trailer. The first impact was faint. Then came another and another. Slow, heavy steps traveled along the roof, compressing the metal with each movement. They crossed the full length of the trailer and stopped directly above the sleeper. My father aimed at the ceiling. Nothing happened. He waited until his arms shook from holding the pistol. Minutes seemed to become hours. At some point, exhaustion pulled him into sleep. Before he lost consciousness, a slow pressure moved across the roof of the sleeper. The metal bent inward slightly, then returned to shape. Whatever stood above him was not trying to enter. It seemed to be testing the cab, learning how much force it could withstand. He dreamed that he was walking through a forest of enormous trees. Roots rose from the earth like frozen waves. Somewhere ahead, a clock was ticking. He followed the sound until he found an old grandfather clock standing between the roots. Its hands moved backward. The ticking became slower, but the shadows surrounding him moved faster. Figures emerged from behind the trees. He ran. Something struck him between the shoulders. My father woke inside the cab with his heart racing. A face was pressed against the side window. There should not have been room for anyone to stand there. The cab rested deep in the median, and snow had risen almost to the bottom of the glass. Yet the face was level with his, suspended several feet above the ground. It was long and colorless, with eyes far too wide for its skull. Its mouth hung open, but the glass blocked whatever sound it was making. He fired. The window shattered. Snow blew into the cab. The face vanished. His phone said 12:13. He was certain he had crashed before midnight. He had inspected the engine, watched the trailer for hours, fallen asleep, dreamed, and fired through the window. According to the phone, only 5 minutes had passed. He began counting seconds aloud. When he reached 60, the time did not change. It took almost 400 counts before the clock advanced by 1 minute. Then the drowsiness returned. It did not feel natural. It pushed through adrenaline and cold, pulling his eyes closed while he fought to stay awake. The next thing he remembered was snow beneath his boots. He was walking through the forest. The truck was gone from sight. He did not remember opening the door or crossing the median. His body had carried him into the trees while his mind slept. Something crawled between the trunks behind him. The same pale face appeared whenever moonlight crossed the snow. Sometimes it moved on 4 limbs. Sometimes it rose onto 2. It never hurried because it knew he had nowhere to go. My father ran blindly until he smelled wood smoke. A cabin stood in a clearing with one yellow window. Behind him came the clicking sound from his dream. It did not resemble footsteps anymore. It sounded like the mechanism of an enormous clock moving between the trees, counting down toward something only it understood. He pounded on the door. An elderly man opened it with a shotgun aimed at his chest. "There is something behind me," my father said. The old man looked past him. Whatever he saw made him pull my father inside and bolt the door. His name was Duncan. His family had lived on that land for generations. He did not claim to know what was outside. He only said that people had disappeared from those woods for as long as his family could remember. Some returned without memories. Some returned years older than they should have been. Most never returned at all. "Why stay here?" my father asked. Duncan looked toward the dark window. "If it wants you," he said, "distance will not help." They waited until daylight. Duncan then drove my father back toward the highway in an old diesel pickup. The rig was still in the median. Every tire had been cut. The remaining windows were broken, and the underside of the engine had been torn apart. Nothing from the cab or trailer had been stolen. My father expected the authorities to tell him he had been stranded for one night. They told him the date. 3 days had passed. Search crews had examined the highway on the first morning. They had found tire marks entering the median, but no truck. On the 3rd day, the rig appeared in the same location, visible from the road as though it had never been missing. No one could explain how a tractor and full trailer had gone unnoticed in open snow. That was why he missed Christmas. It was why he never drove that section of interstate again, and why he eventually started taking the entire month of December away from work. My father has questioned his own memory many times. He can explain the crash, the cold, and perhaps even the dream. He cannot explain the cuts in the engine, the 3 missing days, or how he entered a forest without remembering leaving the truck. Duncan died in 2019. Whatever waited outside the cabin is probably still there. Story 3. The load on Route 333. The company paid far too much money for a job that required no questions. That should have been my first warning. The second was the employee handbook. Most trucking companies fill their manuals with fuel procedures, inspection lists, and insurance rules. Ours contained instructions such as, remain on the main road. Do not stop for people who know your name. If the engine shuts down in the redwood forest, close your eyes until it restarts. and under no circumstances open the trailer. I transported sealed loads along Route 333, a highway that does not appear on public maps. The entrance could only be reached from our private terminal in California. Once a driver passed through the gate, the road could stretch for days through forests, deserts, and towns that did not exist anywhere else. Distance behaved differently there. A fuel station might appear twice in a single afternoon, first abandoned and then crowded with customers wearing clothing from another decade. Mile markers sometimes counted backward. Drivers were warned never to turn around, because the road behind the truck was not always the road they had just traveled. Management never explained what we carried. The money helped us stop asking. My final assignment began at 1 in the morning. My supervisor called me 13 times and offered a $10,000 bonus if I left immediately. The trailer was already connected. There was no shipping manifest, destination name, or listed weight. He handed me a paper map and pointed to a location nearly 5 days down Chute 333. "What is inside?" I asked. He stared at me until I remembered the rule. I entered the highway before dawn. The first day passed without incident. On the second night, I reached the redwood section. The trees rose above the road like pillars, blocking the stars. There were no turnoffs and no safe place to stop. Several miles before the forest, I passed an empty truck facing the wrong direction. Its driver stood beside the cab with both hands covering his eyes. He called my name as I passed, although we had never met. I remembered the handbook and did not slow down. The engine shut down. This happened to every driver on Route 333. The truck would lose power for approximately 2 minutes. During that time, things came out of the forest. I set a stopwatch, lowered myself between the seat and the sleeper, and closed my eyes. Footsteps surrounded the cab. Small hands pulled at the door handles. Nails moved across the glass. Several bodies struck the trailer hard enough to rock the entire vehicle. I kept my eyes closed. The stopwatch passed 2 minutes. The engine did not restart. The movement outside became quiet. Then the forest spoke. "Give it to us." The voice sounded like branches breaking beneath wind, somehow shaped into words. I asked what it wanted. "The thing carried inside your machine." I told it the cargo did not belong to me. The creature offered a bargain. If I opened the trailer, nothing in that forest would harm another driver for an entire generation. The offer made my decision harder. I had seen photographs in the terminal of trucks recovered from that forest. Doors peeled away, windows broken inward, and seats dark with blood. If the promise was genuine, opening one trailer might save dozens of lives. It was an impossible offer. If the thing inside could purchase decades of safety, then it was either enormously valuable or enormously dangerous. "Tell me what it is," I said. The forest refused. The creatures began circling again. Something struck my window. A fracture spread across the glass. I kept talking, asking useless questions, wasting seconds while another impact widened the crack. Just before the window failed, the engine started. I climbed into the seat without opening my eyes, pushed the truck into gear, and accelerated. Branches scraped the windshield as I left the forest. Only after several seconds did I look at the road. Nothing followed me. 2 hours later, I stopped in the desert to examine the damage. The driver's window was splintered and deep dents covered one side of the trailer. The lock and seal remained intact. I should have returned to the cab. Instead, I placed my ear against the cargo door. Someone was crying inside. It sounded like a young girl trying not to be heard. "Hello," I whispered. The crying stopped. I waited with my hand against the lock. Every ordinary instinct told me that a child might be trapped inside. Every rule I had learned on Route 333 told me that things on that highway often sounded human when they wanted a door opened. Then 3 soft knocks came from the other side, not random movement. 3 deliberate knocks. A child's voice spoke through the metal. "Please, it is dark in here." She knew my name. Then she used my sister's name and begged me to tell our mother she was sorry. My sister had died when we were children. There was no record of her in my employment file, and I had never mentioned her to anyone at the company. The lock felt suddenly warm beneath my fingers. I removed my hand from the lock. The voice began to cry again. I drove away without opening the trailer. I completed the delivery 5 days later at a warehouse with no employees and no windows. The moment I disconnected the load, the building doors opened by themselves, and the trailer rolled into the darkness. Before the doors closed, something struck the inside wall with enough force to tilt the trailer on its suspension. A second impact followed, then a third. From somewhere inside the warehouse came the same rustling voice I had heard in the forest. This time, it said only one word: "Returned." I never learned what was inside. Sometimes I think I transported a prisoner. Sometimes I think the company protected the world from whatever had been captured. But I remember the creatures in the forest offering safe passage for an entire generation. They did not sound hungry. They sounded desperate to get it back. And when I remember the girl crying inside that trailer, I always return to the same question. Was she asking me to rescue her? Or was she asking me to open the only door still keeping her contained? 3 highways, 3 drivers who survived because, at the right moment, they refused to open a door. If you travel at night, remember this: kindness can make you stop. Fear can make you run. But neither feeling tells you what is waiting beyond your headlights. This is night evidence.